and welcome to Back in the Gay, which is a panel to discuss everything that we love about historical inspired settings in YA literature. And our moderator today is Rosiee Thor, author of Tarnished Are the Stars, out now from Scholastic. And the forthcoming, she's also author of the forthcoming Fire Becomes Her, which comes out in 2022 from Scholastic. Welcome, Rosiee.
Hi, thanks for introducing me. I'm so excited to be talking to all of you about your wonderful historical novels. I'm so excited about each of your books. They're all forthcoming very soon, I know, and I'm just so excited to read them all, and I'm really excited to talk to you all about them. So if we could go down the line and just have everyone introduce themselves and their books, that would be great. Let's go ahead and start with Carly.
Oh, hi, everyone. I'm Carly Heath, and my debut YA novel is The Reckless Kind, coming out in 2021 from Soho Teen. It's about a trio of queer teens in 1904 Scandinavia, and they go off and live on their own and defy their families. They need to train a wild horse for a horse race and figure out who they are and how to go about living on their own in kind of a restricted society. I'll turn things over to Diana.
Hi, I'm Diana Pinguicha. I'm the author of A Curse of Roses, which comes out December 1st, 2020. And it's about the Princess of Aragon, who has the curse where everything that's food she touches and turns into flowers. And then she sets on to find an enchanted Mora who can maybe help her reverse it and turn all the flowers into all the food. And I pass on to next, Ali. I choose you.
Hi, my name is Alexandray Overy. My debut comes out next year, April 2021, from Inkyard Press. It's called These Feathered Flames. It's a YA fantasy inspired by the Russian folktale The Firebird, about two powerful sisters, one destined to be queen and one destined to be this mythical creature called the Firebird that ensures that the price of magic is always paid. I pitch it as a sort of queer feminist Game of Thrones with Russian folklore, court intrigue, murder mystery, and the most important part, bears that you can ride. We all know this is the best part of the pitch.
Love it.
So Xiran, on to you.
All right, hi, I'm Xiran. My book, Iron Widow, comes out fall 2021 from Penguin Teen, and it's a Pacific Rim meets The Handmaid's Tale retelling of the rise of Wu Zetian, the only female emperor in Chinese history. And so it's basically Girls of Paper and Fire, but with giant mechas fighting giant aliens. And it has a setting that's inspired by ancient China, but it's actually sci-fi. And it's very anime. And it also features a love triangle that resolves into polyamory, because people have been asking that for forever, so I am making it happen.
Yay!
All of our gay dreams are coming true.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, well, I guess let's start with just what drew you to your specific historical period or your specific historical figures that you're working with here in your stories. What's the inspiration there? What things about it really just stood out to you when you first started these stories?
We have a very vocal cat who likes to talk about historical settings. I'll start, and my setting is early 20th century, and I love the period of the transition from horses to motor cars, and I like that there is it's a time period that hasn't been really, you don't see it a lot in current YA literature because it's not a wartime period. It's not, it's kind of a quiet period in history. And it's, I don't think we have a lot of YA literature that focuses on like pastoral rule, like small village life in the turn of the century. And so I thought it was a wonderful setting to set a bunch of queer kids who are doing things their own way, despite their village that's a little bit restrictive. How about you, Xiran?
Okay, so my setting is ancient China-esque, and I chose it because I'm very fascinated in a very morbid way about how morals and virtues can be used to control women, and how women can rise to power in spite of everyone around them saying stuff like, oh, women should put others ahead of themselves and be willing to sacrifice, and women should live for their families and community above all, like above themselves, and that you are only a good woman if you do this. And that was the moral and cultural standard, but there were clearly women who broke the mold anyway. And Empress Wu Zetian is the most prominent example of this. So it's very inspiring and very empowering to adapt her life story.
Yeah. How about you, Ali?
Yeah, I think for me, Russian history has always been a really an interesting sort of area for me, partly because, especially if you go back to sort of earlier, before it really got integrated into sort of the rest of Europe, you get this such sort of rich mythology behind it, and this magic and history that so interweaves together, which made it so perfect for sort of fairy tale setting. I think I loved the way that you have the magic basically is integral to the history. It's not a sort of like made up mythology necessarily. It's something that's very much felt real and is very important and part of the sort of Russian culture. And that, really informed the setting and the way that I wanted to create it for these feathered flames.
Fantastic. Deanna?
For me, I grew up in Estremoz, where everything is named after Isabella of Aragon. So I grew up listening to her story about how she turned bread into roses because she would sneak out of the castle to feed the poor, like a very good Christian saint that she was. And so I was really drawn to the story because, sort of a floral, feminine Midas touch. And she was everywhere growing up, and the more I read, the more I realized she was likely queer. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to set a story in my hometown and make it gay as hell because they would not like it. And also because there is nothing in YA about Portugal in the 1300s.
Yeah.
Now, our moderator, Rosiee, you have an upcoming story set in kind of like a 1920s inspired era.
Yes.
What drew you to that era?
Yeah, I was really drawn to the idea of prohibition and the classist elements involved there, the way that alcohol was used as a signifier of class. If you're an upper class person, you can drink alcohol and not get in trouble. If you're not, if you're at a speakeasy or you're caught on the street by someone, you do get in trouble. It's a screwed up system that, continues to be pervasive in every element of our society anyway, even though prohibition is over. And I was really drawn to that idea and the way that it intersects with queerness, and that a lot of the times in historical time periods, we have queerness as a vilified way to be. It's not accepted in a lot of places that we see historically. And so I wanted to play with that element of queerness as something that it shouldn't be forbidden the same way. And so getting to play in that area was really fun for me. But really, I just wanted to write about magic that you can drink and then burn stuff. That was really it. I was like, what if they drank the magic and then they could light stuff on fire and commit arson?
Love it.
But yeah, it was an exciting time period for me to draw from. It's not set in the 1920s. It is very much just inspired by, but it was very cool to do that research, which actually brings me to my next question, which is, what was the coolest or most interesting queer thing you discovered in your research on these books? Let's start with, it looks like Carly has an answer ready to go.
I was just going to dive in to fill in the
go.
silence. So just how not that big of a deal. Like, I think we have this idea that queerness was strange and really forbidden, and immediately illegal in historical times. But really, as you dive into the research, a lot of people just didn't really make that big of a deal out of it. And I really like that that kind of normalization of it. Like I think the idea that that queerness was really a-traditional kind of came out in like the 50s and 60s. I think if you really look back at the early 20th century, there was kind of not that big of a deal feeling towards it. In fact, I'm just reading right now a memoir that was written in 1906, and it's the first like happy gay novel that we know about, and it's, I don't know how to pronounce the title. It's Emery by Xavier Maine, and it's a happy gay relationship of two men falling in love, and it's they're so similar to the queer culture has not changed in many ways. Literally the first page, okay, he's going to get an iced coffee. I kid you not. The first page, he's going to get an iced coffee, and he meets the love of his life, right? They talk about animals. They talk about
early 1900s coffee AU.
Yes. And anyway, so queer culture hasn't changed, and I think it was a lot less of a big deal than we tend to think of it as when we're looking back at the past. Yeah.
So I'll take from that. Mine was when I was researching medieval lesbians, I came across the fact that the Moors had terms for lesbian called sihak and sahika. That's lesbianism and lesbian. And they thought it was an incurable disease that was passed down by breastfeeding. Like if the woman breastfeeding you ate fruit of the orange tree, not fruit, the flowers of an orange tree and some other foods, then the child would turn out a lesbian.
Oh my god.
That's gonna be my main diet now.
Yeah, right? No straight babies coming feed on me. So yeah, I don't know. Xiran, did you find anything?
Yeah, so it turns out there is a Chinese god of male love, and he's called the Tuar Shin, or the rabbit god. And his origins are kind of sleazy. Like, he was spying on a handsome official when the official was taking a bath, and he got beaten to death because of it. But when he got to the underworld officials were like, you know what? Your crime was a crime of love, so how about you go back as a patron deity of men who love men? And so he did that. And then such a large cult grew around him that the Qing dynasty had to be like, oh my god, stop, please, to the local people. So yeah, that's
truly an icon.
I mean, kind of sleazy, but still, you know.
What about you, Allie?
I feel like mine is fairly similar to Carly's in terms of I didn't really research specific people. It was much more of a generalized setting. And I think it's the same idea, basically that for whatever reason, people like to peddle this narrative that either queer people didn't exist or being queer has always been sort of outside of the norm or not allowed. And I think it's very much a sort of modern Western idea. I mean, for myself as a British person, it's, you know, the Victorians brought that in. They like to be very prudish about everything. And really, when you look, especially at sort of Russia pre-integration into Western Europe, you get a lot more variety in terms of, obviously it's not outwardly spoken, it's not accepted in the way that we would want, but it's a lot less binary than people would like to pretend, I think.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And that's exactly what I found, is it's something that's very much a more recent line of thinking, and that we erase these narratives or make them forbidden. And that's more of a modern thing. A lot of the times those people were able to have fulfilling and happy lives, and we like to pretend like they didn't, and that's silly. Which actually brings me to my next question, which is, because queerness is often erased in history, I'm wondering how you went about recentering those queer narratives in a historical context. How did you go about kind of rectifying that? Let's just go in the backwards order. Let's start with Allie.
For me, this was so something, and for me, what I really wanted to do was create maybe a slightly sort of, I mean, it's fantastical anyway, it's a fantastical world, a sort of ideal world in terms of this is a world where queerness is very normal, it's very much accepted, it's not something where, you know, people don't have to come out necessarily, it's very much like a queer normalized world. And I think it was nice for me to be able to create this sort of world where, you know, I have the main romance between two girls, and the issue for them is nothing to do with the fact that it's two girls. The issue for them is that various other issues, that one of them's, you know, an ancient fiery bird that likes to take people's hearts. And that's not to say, of course, that there's not a place for books where you can explore sort of difficulties with being queer, but for me it was very cathartic writing a world where I had this historical inspired setting, I had magic and fantasy and adventure, and queerness was just a part of that inherently. It wasn't a sort of separate element, it just was integral to the world as it is.
Great.
All right, and I think I did this just by featuring queer characters prominently and showcasing their experiences, especially their experiences in a culture that doesn't really see queerness as a sin because of religious reasons. Like in like Chinese folk religions, there really wasn't like, it didn't condemn queerness explicitly because like it was a sin or whatever. So there were like more complicated reasons that queerness may have not been accepted. So I just wrote about that and featured that prominently.
Something I talk about in my author's note a lot is the idea, well, my main character is a queer girl, and I mean, sadly, something that queer people who are not cis men often feel kind of gatekept out of the queer community a little bit. And so something I really wanted to do was make these cis guys really nurturing and really supportive of this queer girl. And there are other genders besides the binary that get some screen time, as it were. And I wanted to have that discourse of the queer kids being a source of comfort for each other, and have that inclusion that I think is something that within the queer community, I think we can certainly all have a little bit more of, where we all, instead of gatekeeping certain people out, but being more inclusive and being more like, we are all in this together, and we are, you know, a team here. And so that's kind of my approach to recentering queer narratives.
So for me, I had some trouble because I was writing a hardcore Christian pious main character. So it would be a problem because she was raised in this very patriarchal society. And I had to give her a lady's maid who was also a lesbian, who was just like, you know what, that's the interpretation. There are other ways to interpret the text, and there is no problem. You're going to be fine. There's nothing wrong with you. And also, why do you think we are all at convents? And that Isabel did after her husband, the King of Portugal, died. She did retire to a convent and lived out the rest of her lives among the queer lesbians.
Yeah, there's a lot of great lesbian research that's you know, set in convents, because lesbians congregate around convents.
Yeah, no one to bother them.
Yeah, love
They're
it.
married to Christ.
Yeah,
love it.
All right, well, since we're all talking about this erasure throughout history of narratives of queerness that are other than just tragic or ostracized queer people, I'm wondering about the broad spectrum of queer experiences and how you put those in your books and what kinds of experiences people can expect to find in these stories.
Well, in my book, I have an ace girl is my center main character. She also makes sure to, I address, I never put a label on her, one, because it's 1900s, early 1900s, and so there weren't necessarily labels, so you want to kind of show her identity through her actions. So she has pan-romantic tendencies. She expresses aesthetic appreciation of all genders of people, and she definitely goes through an experience where she realizes that she is ace, but she realizes that through the actions that she experiences and the thoughts she has, even though she doesn't have that label to use to identify herself. And there is a very supportive gay romance between two cis guys in my book. There is a trans character who is ends up with a very happy ending for all my queer characters. They all get a very happy ending, and I make sure to let people know that it's going to be happy, because I don't think I think that you want to go to a work of literature and have some comfort. So in my particular case, not necessarily like all literature has to be comforting, but for this particular book, it is a very comforting book.
Except it rips out your heart about like 7 times.
Oh, thank you.
I was gonna say.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, there is definitely there is drama, but I think there's a lot of support and a lot of big-hearted characters with big feels. And,
yeah, it's got a big found family vibe.
Yeah.
Oh,
Love that.
Yeah. What about you, Deanna?
Mine was that, there are certain narratives that are imposed upon us as women from a very young age. And I wanted to write about breaking free of them and give them all a happy, happy ending. Because I also gave all my queer characters a happy ending. I was so depressed with everything. I was like, no, you know what? They deserve this. Let them have it. This is a fairy tale anyway.
Yeah, definitely. And that's not to say that like tragedy is bad. We support all stories. If they're tragic stories, if they're happy stories, if there's, sad stories, there's a place for all of that.
There's a very broad spectrum of stories that exist in our space, and I think that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Ali, do you want to talk about yours a little bit?
Yeah, for me, I mean, it kind of comes back to, again, what I was saying about trying to create this culture of queer normalization. So I really tried to, in creating, so like the religious system is based on saints, and I tried to sort of create, there's non-binary saints, saints who vary across various spectrums of queer identity. And I think for me, that was something that was really integral to creating this world, because I feel like if this is a world where, saints and the gods are allowed to be on the queer spectrum, and that really defined what I wanted, like how I wanted this culture to be. Yeah, so sort of a lot across that. The main relationship in the book is female-female, enemies to lovers. Azia does not define herself with labels either, partly just because it's a fantasy book, and I think they wouldn't necessarily have the same language we have for it. But she's very definitely a lesbian. And I think, yeah, across the book, I get similar to what Carly said. I don't use necessarily specific labels, but try and make it very clear what the identities are and the ways in which they fit in through the sort of dialogue and actions of the characters.
all right. So in my book, I showcase polyamory, which is really common in ancient China, but mostly in the form of one man having multiple concubines. And I just wanted to be like, you know what? My YA protagonist, she gets to have both her boyfriends, and her boyfriends also become boyfriends.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yeah. We love to hear it. And I forgot to mention, I have a queer platonic triad in mine too. So
Yeah.
I kind of do too.
I love it. I love it so much.
Great.
I think that's so wonderful.
Isabel does marry Dennis. I mean, it's canon. Denise.
There you go.
It's canon. She still keeps Fatien.
Yeah. Well, it's so wonderful, because I think, especially with historical, we do have that misconception that there's only one or two narratives that exist. And it's so good to see such a broad spectrum of different identities, but also different experiences that we get to see in historical stories. So,
and if you think about it, the kings had a bunch of, you know, women lovers and a bunch of bastards to continue the line. Who couldn't say that the queen also had lady friends?
Yeah,
I mean, it's not she was going to get pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the narratives of people who were not cis guys have gotten erased from history.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, we don't get as much about the queens or the princesses, or even, you know, we get more about cis guys who are peasants than
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
you know,
We've talked about this. Women are so infantilized in that way that they were just really good friends.
Yeah.
They were
Yeah.
just really good
No, it's
friends.
because it intimidates cis men so much, especially like the cis men who write the histories. They're like, no, women can't do that. No, we're
Yeah.
gonna
Yeah,
leave
women can't have
Ah.
separate sex drives.
That's
No.
wild.
I mentioned that medieval the Moors believed that there was a disease, that it was incurable. They said that to ease the symptoms, women should rub their private parts together if they're in heat.
Oh my god.
Amazing.
Oh
I
my
did my thesis on female identity in medieval times, so that's like a perfect fun fact. I love it so much.
Amazing.
So I do want to know what each of you found to be the most difficult thing about writing in a historical time period or writing something based on history, and what did you find most difficult about that?
I'll start because
Great.
mine was that I had to be. So I was writing about Isabel, and I love her. She's one of my favorite historical figures, and so is Denise the First, who is her husband and who would not end up, you know, together in the book. So I had to make him kind of a villain and not, and that was very hard while keeping respect toward our history.
yeah. I will say,
It was
like,
a hard balance to strike.
Yeah, writing villains is, for me, really hard, especially for, I know everyone's like, I love writing villains. I have a really hard time writing villains, especially in like a historical time period, because I have a really hard time understanding like people, like anyone who wants to make things difficult for someone else. Like, why, how do you have the energy to make to be such a bastard? So I have a hard time getting into that. So reading like on Google Books, like these religious pamphlets that are all about like the dangers of, you know, being an immoral, you know, masturbator. Or you know, like these religious pamphlets are a great place to go for like to get that voice, I guess you could say, that like really do.
I'm
Like,
laughing because I found a pamphlet about this, what do you call, priest, Catholic priest, who had sex with like 300 something women, spawned like a lot of children, and he was sentenced to die, but then they forgave him because he was doing the Lord's mission of repopulating the earth.
oh my god.
So I did actually kind of use that as well, because men got a lot more excuses for like everything.
Seriously.
Yeah, something that's difficult is like the language, like getting that, like
the language, it was really hard.
Yeah.
Because a lot of words would not exist. And I mean, it was the 1300s for me, so I could not find dictionaries for things that long ago. The earliest they go to is the 1500s. So if it was in the 1500s, I took it. And if it derived from Latin, I used it as valid.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
What about you, Xiran?
Oh boy, okay, honestly, it's getting the cultural intricacies across to a Western audience. Like, people get confused about things that are just intuitive to me, and I have to be like, oh boy, okay, how do I explain this? Like there, like, for example, the Chinese elements, there are 5 of them, and it's like, it's wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, and that confused people so much because it's different from the traditional like water, earth, fire, and air that's in Western.
It's not Avatar, so they don't get it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I honestly kind of feel betrayed by Avatar that they didn't use the actual like Chinese
Yeah.
5 elements, but still, like, yeah, that confused people, and I had to be like, oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I found partly because mine is not a like specifically historical setting, so it's a historical inspired setting. I think the hardest thing was deciding where to divert from actual history and where to sort of try to keep true to it, especially as I was using a folktale, which is a very popular and quite very important folktale within that culture. It's the balance between creating a fantasy world where you get sort of your own license to do whatever you want, and also keeping important elements from all the original from the original story and the original history of it. That was definitely the most difficult.
I can hear that your cat agrees with you.
She agrees.
Your
She's my
cat
editor, so
Yeah. She's like GLaDOS, like when Cave Johnson's going about science, and GLaDOS just like, yeah. Sorry. I was playing Portal. I was playing Portal earlier.
Oh, okay. Well, I've got a couple of like fun rapid fire questions now, so we can just kind of make this quick and go through them. But who's your favorite queer historical figure?
I'm going to give a shout out to Wiwa, who is a Two-Spirit indigenous Zuni person from New Mexico in the 19th century. Google them, Wiwa, W-E, and then little apostrophe W-A-H.
They're very cool.
Yeah, mine was Dom Pedro I, who is very famous for a romance with a woman named Inês de Castro. And that's fine. It ended tragically. She was decapitated along with all the children, but what he's not as famous for is all his night lovers. And all the men he secretly took into his chamber.
It sounds like a lot. How many?
There were several. I mean, there are documents that were not burned, unlike those of Vasco da Gama that said that he wrote like sonnets and stuff.
Oh, I have to add one more because I just realized I have the book here. J.C. Leyendecker, who's a famous illustrator, who is known for the arrow collar shirt man. His boyfriend was Charles Beach, who is this guy here. And they were together for like many decades, and his boyfriend was like the most iconic, famous like sex symbol in advertising of the early 20th century.
Oh man, like relationship goals.
Yeah.
Truly.
Yeah. Okay, so shout outs to Liu Bang, founder of the Han Dynasty and the first commoner Chinese emperor. He was bisexual, and then his entire dynastic lineage was like full of bisexual emperors. So
chaotic
very
bisexuals.
Iconic. Yeah. The Han Dynasty was the bisexual dynasty.
Mine is not very original, perhaps, but I've been watching Dickinson, which is really great if you've not seen it. So Emily Dickinson is going to be mine, just because she had, in so many ways, sort of the original iconic brooding poetry about another woman. And, if you, again, someone who very much was like, she was very good friends with, I've completely forgotten her name, but
gal pals.
Yeah, just good gal pals with her brother's wife. That was all completely. And I do love that we have something like the TV show Dickinson now that can sort of reclaim that a bit.
Wasn't there a US president's wife who was also Roosevelt? Yes. Eleanor Roosevelt, was it?
No, I think maybe it was it Edith Wilson?
I just recently saw a documentary that mentioned that.
It certainly was somebody. There's a book about it that I've been meaning to read. There's so many gay people that we just in history that we don't know about.
Yeah, it was Eleanor Roosevelt. Sorry,
Roosevelt.
I googled.
I knew it started with an E.
I googled it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'll bounce off of Ali. I was going to say Emily Dickinson also, but we'll just put a little plug in here for Sappho.
Oh yeah.
That's a good one. Right.
That's my favorite.
Okay.
No, my favorite
ahead.
story about her is her husband. What was it? Something from Man Island. Was it like Big Dickus from Man Island? It was something like that, but it was so funny.
Sorry, big dick.
Yeah.
It was something like that. I'm not sure if it was Big Dickus.
That's like a Monty Python sketch.
I know, it sounds like one, right? And now obviously a lot of why we love history is the aesthetic fashion trends. So what's your favorite historical fashion element?
I've just been.
Oh, I love whatever Xiran's showing
Yeah.
as far as fashion goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a dress inspired by Qing Dynasty garb, which is like the last imperial Chinese dynasty, and it was established by the Manchus. And so they have this collar thing, and I think it's very pretty. I like it.
It is. It's very pretty.
Thank you.
Anyone else got?
I like
favorite?
Baroque. It's all very extra. All the frills.
Well, I like the neoclassical early 1800s. They would even, the women at least, would wear their dresses without corsets and bras. And at certain parties, this is like around the teens, the 20s, and they would soak their dresses too in water before they went to their parties, so that the dress would like stick to their skin and they would look like statues. But also, you can imagine without the corsets, how it was very sexy. And I think people don't realize just how sexy the early 1800s were. And in the 1700s too, the men were so pretty, and the men had just wonderful, like, detailed waistcoats, and the men would wear makeup and curl their hair so pretty. So before, what's his name, that dude, I always forget.
The one guy.
That one guy ruined it for
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah, it was that one
Google
guy.
him. What his name is? It starts with a B, doesn't it?
We can forget his name. We'll pretend he's not important.
Yeah. Anyway, what happened was men were dressed so pretty, and they would put so much work into their appearance. And then this one guy came along and was like, the real man has to be plain, and he has to wear black, and he has to be very simple. And then
Ruined it for us all.
Yeah.
it's just been, men have been ugly.
It's funny because I was just reading up on our poets, one called Bocage, and he was a satirist among very other things. And he was one of the last few Portuguese dandies in that he dressed in that very flamboyant manner.
Mm-hmm.
But it was in decay because of that one guy. He ruined
God,
for
who
all
is
of us.
this
Across
guy?
the globe. Across
That guy
the globe.
really ruined it.
He's the one we
did.
should erase from history.
Yeah.
He ruined men's fashion for centuries.
Yeah, I'm gonna Google him and then post him in my Twitter. So those of you watching the panel, like, yeah, we'll try and remember his name. This is why you don't have a panel during Mercury retrograde, when our brains are not working.
No, that's the real call out that needs to happen. That guy.
Yeah.
That guy canceled. Let's bring back powdered wigs.
Seriously though.
And the vest.
Can we bring
I
back
want to bring back
cloaks, please?
vests.
I
Cloaks
would
are
really like to bring
great.
back cloaks.
I've already brought back cloaks. I wear them.
I
I
really
don't know
thought
if you're all familiar with the Portuguese traje, but that's something you wear if you're like an academic and you're in college. But it has a black cape,
There
and
we
it
go.
also has a vest. And girls can wear the vest now too. We couldn't when I was in college, but they can now. And I want to
That's
bring back
good.
vests.
Yeah,
And I
that's a
want to
great
walk around
one.
with my black cloak wrapped around me.
I
Like
really
a
thought we were
cocoon.
going to see a comeback of capes and cloaks after the most recent Star Wars movies, and like all of Leia's like really good cloaks, and then we didn't get any sort of fashion. Was just like, nah, we're not going to do this.
I know, can the
Yeah,
fashion
because
industry
people
get on that,
complain about
please?
those movies
So
too
disappointed.
much.
Yeah. I was going to say that my favorite fashion trend is just hats across the board. I just think
I
hats
do
are
love
great, and we should bring them back. And we
Hats,
don't wear
I
enough
agree.
hats.
I have several hats that I wear, and every time I do, I feel a bit like a sort of 1940s detective. It's the best.
Yes, it's great.
Hats and headbands.
Yes, big
They
fan
don't-
of
didn't get
headwear.
enough credit.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, well, last one here is that what is a bucket list historical period or historical figure that you have always wanted to queer in fiction?
Ooh.
Tang Dynasty
I wanted
China.
the
Yeah.
one.
The Tang Dynasty China, which is the most socially liberal dynasty in Chinese history, and it was like 1,000 years ago, and it was like the peak of Chinese civilization. Honestly, it's gone downhill since.
I would like to do the Portuguese discoveries, but before the terrible colonization happened. So, you know, just the sea voyage. And I would like to queer up Camões. Even though he died in misery among women, I will queer him up. Because he reportedly like swam one-handed to save his manuscript, which it's
Relatable.
Relatable.
Did not happen. But I will bring in narrates, and I will make like a queer island of loves, which is the chapter of the Lusiads we could not read in high school. It was censored.
I mean, the founding fathers were super gay. So, I mean, it would be great if someone would do kind of like a Hamilton-esque, you know, addressing how gay the founding fathers were, and maybe delve into what we know about them, but what we don't know about them, you know.
I've just thought of like 6 pun titles for that, but I can't say any of them out loud.
This is your gift. You can do pun titles.
I swear if I had a dream job, it would just be like being the person who comes up with punny titles for like detective books.
Love it.
I think one I've always wanted to do is exploring Queen Elizabeth, and potentially not necessarily in terms of her being like a lesbian, which I think is the narrative people lean towards, but maybe looking into like asexuality and romanticism, and you know, a woman who is allowed to like make that choice for herself separately and come to understand herself. I think that would be really interesting to explore.
Yeah, that's really empowering. I was gonna say mine is Queen Edith and Edward the Confessor. They were the rulers of England right before the Norman Conquest, and they were notoriously childless. And this is what I did my thesis on, which is why I'm obsessed with it. But Edith had a book written about Edward's life, the Vita Edwardi, and it is in it. She essentially says we were childless because we were chaste, and that was because Edward was so holy and he was very pure and religious. And I'm over here thinking like, or for Ace.
See, that was me and Isabel. She was very religious. She like stopped as soon as she had the boy that would inherit. It was like, what if?
Yeah. So I think like there's a lot that's not told there. So I've always wanted to.
A lot of piety, I think you can go, what if?
Yeah.
That was probably Ace people being like, oh yeah, I love Jesus so much.
I just love Jesus so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a very interesting thing to investigate, because there's so much we don't know about their motivations behind those things, and it's such a cool thing to explore. So yeah. Well, that's all the time we have. So if everyone could just go down the line quickly, and if you would like to plug your social media or your website or something like that, that would be great. And then we'll just all be on our way. Have a very gay day.
Yep, definitely. I'm Carly Heath, and you can find me on Twitter at Carly L. Heath. And I'm like at twitter.com, like what? No.
Yeah.
So at Carly L. Heath, and my book is The Reckless Kind. Find it on Goodreads.
I don't know.
Hi, I'm Diana. Can you want to go first, Ali?
You go. I can't tell who's in the line.
I can't. It's all different for everyone. But anyway, I'm Diana Pinguicha, and I'm at Pinguicha, my last name, everywhere, because I got first on the internet before anyone else in my 30 family members could. My book is a miracle. Not a miracle, they changed my title. A Curse of Roses.
Oh, it's a
Ali,
curse now. Okay.
It's a curse now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big change. We'll have to discuss that another time. But yeah, I'm at Alexandray Overy on Twitter, and you can add my book, These Feathered Flames, on Goodreads.
All right, I am at Xiran Jay Zhao everywhere, but I especially use Twitter and Instagram. If you want to see more like this, follow me on Instagram.
Okay.
All right.
And I'm Rosiee Thor. You can find me at Rosiee Thor everywhere. And my book, Tarnished Are the Stars, is out now. And Fire Becomes Her is coming out later. You can add it on Goodreads.
So excited for all of these books.
Me too. All right, well, thanks everyone for coming.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.